Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Just Great People podcast with Barry Eustance, and my guest today is Alexis Brathwaite. Alexis has got a really fascinating story from air traffic controller to the chief executive officer of the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers. These are the people who've kept you and me safe for many, many years. And the importance of air traffic control and leadership within air traffic control cannot be overstated. So, Alexis, welcome. You might like to explain how you and I are coming to talk together, but over to you. I look forward to hearing your story.
Hi, Barry. Good morning from rainy Trinidad and Tobago. I suppose we should start by saying that as of this October, I'm a year out of air traffic control, having, decided to retire, whatever that means. I'm still trying to figure that out. So, and that was after more than 30 years. I started in air traffic control in 1990. And as you said, one of the things that was fascinating was being part of the International Federation, and started going to conferences in 1993. And so spent a long time, working at the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Association, which is a volunteer organization. So that's done along, doing your job as an air traffic controller.
Absolutely.
So I functioned there from my first conference in 1993, and there's sort of like two distinct stages. Up to 2001, I was very active in the Federation, functioning on several of their standing committees. And actually, when I stopped in 2001, I was chairman of the finance committee. Of course, I was to be part of the International Federation. You're part of the local association. So a local association is the Trinidad and Tobago Air Traffic Controllers Association, who coincidentally is from the 15th to the 17th, will be hosting the annual America's regional meeting in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right.
And so it was interesting when I was thinking about this podcast and, thinking about, my time in aviation. And I was also talking to the chairman of the local association. So I had to be going back and sort of been pulled back into that.
I hope we haven't contributed to any retirement stress, Alexis. For our esteemed listener and viewer, can you just explain, I guess the function of air traffic control? Because for a lot of people, it's this thing, but it's the air traffic controller or the air traffic control, like the pilot. But what does it mean? What do you do? And equally importantly, is the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers. What does that do as a grouping, as an association? How does it affect our listener and viewers?
Yes. So air traffic control is not that entity that is responsible for delays on the tarmac, as often said to the passengers.
Yes.
So it was always funny sitting in the back of a plane and hearing, we have an air traffic control delay.
Yeah, exactly.
And and I tend to think of it of it's a traffic delay, right? It's like blaming the traffic lights for stops on the road, right? It's really the traffic. And air traffic control, as stated, the responsibility is to prevent, collision, between aircraft on the ground or in the air, and to expedite the flow of air traffic, to provide an efficient flow of air traffic. So the two coincident focuses safety and efficiency. And for me, they go together. I would say, in fact, that for safety, we have to take that for granted. The safety has to be in the system. That's the fundamental job. So the key then is to provide safety along with efficiency, because efficiency is then what makes the business. We can have a safe airline.
It would never fly, would it? Or the safe car would never drive.
Exactly.
The 100% safe vehicle, you'd never go to see or drive a car.
The real core of air traffic control, even though we talk a lot about the safety, because I think people understand, but the real focus is ensuring, that efficiency. And as a colleague of mine said, one a very smart guy from Australia used to explain it, that the role of the air traffic controller is to allocate these finite resources. Who lands when, how you move. So for instance, we start having rules, right? So aircraft are taxiing out, and so you start off by saying first come, first served. Except if by changing that order, you have a more efficient flow. So a pilot might think, oh, I'm the first in line, but then, you see someone else goes and he's wondering why that is happening. The air traffic controller is looking and determining, oh, if I move this other aircraft first, I can actually get 2 or 3 aircraft off within the same time, that I would have one if I chose another aircraft. So the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, that's NATCA from the US, they have a slogan, and their slogan is, we bring you home, and I think for the flying public, I think that's the key. It's one of those cogs in this vast, complex, collaborative system that ensures movement from, and you might look at it from gate to gate or curb to curb, but that's the aviation system. It's really a whole complex system of different entities working together to move people safely and efficiently.
And globally. And I think that's often missed, isn't it? That it's a global interaction and a global synergistic system that has to operate seamlessly 24 hours a day, regardless of weather and technical delays and technical issues. You are the people who are actually making things work when sometimes they don't.
Yeah, so first, before I talk about the global part, let's talk about it 24/7. Whenever the news, whenever we talk about air traffic control, they tend to show an air traffic control tower. And for most people, for most of the public, that's what's associated with air traffic control. When that's the start, and let's say the start and the end, right? And so when I first became an air traffic controller and had no idea what it was, before I joined, I would see that, there's a news item and they show the control tower, but 24/7, at night, from let's say midnight, to 5 in the morning was one of our busiest periods, when everyone else, was sleeping. So if a normal person went to the airport, they would probably see very little activity. But for the air traffic controller in the air traffic control center, that was that busy period. So it was 24/7. And what we were controlling at that time, as you said, is that global movement of air traffic. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and we are responsible for what's called the PIACO Flight Information Region, which is one of the vast airspaces in the world. So we control airspace from south of Trinidad, if you know the Eastern Caribbean region, from south of Trinidad to just north of Antigua, but then to halfway across the Atlantic. So again, persons flying. So if you're flying like, last night you would have had persons flying from, well, I'm not sure how Milton might have affected that, but we should have had persons flying, from North America, from Canada or the US to Brazil and vice versa. And for a vast period of time there, they would have been in the responsibility of Trinidad and Tobago, air traffic controllers from Trinidad and Tobago. And just before that, they would have been the responsibility of controllers from Guyana, and then taken over by, Puerto Rico. So so you have that global network. And so the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Association is, that association is a federation of associations from all over the world. And because of the global nature of air traffic control, it means that regardless of what country I'm in and whatever the standards are in that country, we have to provide a service that's at an international standard. And that was what the Federation did, coming together since 1961. Following on from, our brothers and sisters in the International Federation of Airline Pilots Association. So that organization was, in fact, very instrumental in getting us up and running. And then we, through the years, collaborated at the International Civil Aviation Organization. We tend to refer to that as ICAO, which is a UN body. And at that organization, we come together to establish the standards and recommended practices for aviation that we seek to follow throughout the world.
And I think what should be mentioned, and I speak from operational experience, I have, as an airline captain, flown into the Caribbean and spoken to PIACO and Bermuda and Santa Maria and these oceanic control areas where, in fact, there tends not to be radar. The communications are voice communications, and what we now call CPLDC, which is pilot controller data communications. And perhaps you could explain to our listeners and viewers quite how that works when you have an environment that hasn't got radar, and actually vast areas of the world don't. A lot of Africa doesn't have radar, and most of the oceanic areas don't. So over to you again, Alexis. Perhaps you could clarify that and just explain how that works.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, a lot of travel takes place over the ocean. And because radar is a line of sight service, then so your typical range is 250 nautical miles. So you need a physical entity, antenna on the ground, that's sending out a signal to 250 nautical miles. So unless you have networks that you can cover, then there's going to be many areas without a radar coverage. So of course we talk about radar, but we have moved on to just using the term surveillance, because we now have different type of surveillance. So we have ADS-B, so we can now start using satellites. And so there are means now where we can have satellites and a move to actually cover all of these areas with ADS-B surveillance that were previously not. But the interesting thing for me...
Quick, could you explain what ADS means? So for our listeners, I know, folks, honestly, I do. I've used it. But
so ADS means automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. And radar, as I mentioned, it's an antenna that's sending out a signal to the aircraft. And the aircraft needs to have a transponder on board that picks that signal up and send it back to the antenna. So it's dependent both on the antenna on the ground and the transponder in the aircraft. In the case of the satellite, this is automatic in the sense that you have a satellite that's simply sending out a signal. The aircraft has a receiver, and then that's sent back to the ground. So in fact, interestingly, most of our viewers might be aware of Flight Aware and
Radar 24, Flight Radar 24, isn't it?
That's what I'm trying to remember. And that is actually using these independent satellites. So you don't even need, the official entity. In fact, I have a Flight Radar 24 antenna on my roof, and I'm part of the system sending that signal. So any aircraft that's flying through
one.
Sends out and it picks that up. So that is going to be able to give us the coverage, a more worldwide coverage. The interesting thing, of course, is that for years you had no radar and the system was just as safe. And the key thing in air traffic control is communication. So we can have all of the fancy systems, radar systems, surveillance systems, new equipment, computers. Once communication goes,
we're back to voice. We're back to voice.
So once we can talk to the aircraft, and once we both understand the system and be able to provide instructions, air traffic control can happen, and the system can be efficient. And so that's why we are able to operate in vast areas without radar, but still provide that safe, reliable, efficient service.
Yeah, and I think the work that the air traffic control system and people like you, Alexis, have done is extraordinary. I flew about 8 million miles over about 48-year period, both as pilot, captain, and passenger. I did a lot of commuting.
Yes.
And I'm here to tell the tale. I got home, they brought me home. And it's doing that 24/7 globally. And that gives you a sense of just how big integrated this whole system is and how important international federations of air traffic controllers and pilots associations are in keeping that safety standard. And I think that's an important point, isn't it, Alexis?
Yes. And I think, the pilot is responsible, for that aircraft and the passengers on that aircraft, and to get that safely from, departure to destination. The air traffic controller is then responsible for all the flights in the system. So you have a pilot being responsible for, for one aircraft, but then the air traffic controller has been responsible for all of the aircraft that might be, moving through at that particular space and time, and then having to ensure that they are safe, from each other, but also that they're running an efficient flight path. And of course, in this time where we have, hurricanes, it's hurricane season. That's another key element in terms of ensuring that aircraft can move around, weather easily. Yes, you have radar systems, but that communication from both the controller within a particular control center, but also communicating to the adjacent centers, which is a very key scenario. So when we talk about communication, it's not just the communication with, the air traffic controller and the pilot. As you mentioned, passing through our airspace, you're talking about Santa Maria. So we have direct communication with Santa Maria. We have direct communication with New York, with Cayenne, with Georgetown, with Venezuela, with San Juan. And that has to be up and running all the time to ensure this constant efficient system.
And is it, to listener and viewer, it is said that air traffic controllers call pilots blip drivers because we are the people in the blips that go across the screen that they pass on to the next control center. And I'm very happy that happened because this handoff is critically important.
Yes.
And what was it that, I mean, looking back now, what was it that you set out to do, Alexis, in the air traffic control environment that motivated you to get involved? And then sort of in retrospect, are you happy with where it worked out, how it worked out, or what's left to be done? What's the outstanding work that you think, having kicked your heels up and relaxed a little bit, a bit?
It's fascinating. I think there's a lot still to be done. And so, air traffic control was just a happenstance for me. So one of the things that's, I think, interesting is from, the mid 1980s to just before 1990, I was in Barbados at the University of the West Indies. I say I was there trying to getting an education. I didn't complete the degree that I was supposed to go there for. So basically, in 1989, I was looking for a job, and air traffic control was one of those jobs. I really, did not know much about it. And in fact, the fact that I ended up in the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Association, that one of my closest associations was with the National Air Traffic Controllers Association in the US. I always say to the stories that at the time I got involved as an air traffic controller, the only thing I really knew about air traffic controllers was that Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. So, just as how life, changes. So the first part for me was in that period in mid 1980s to 1990, I was actually flying back and forth between Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados a lot. And then in 1990, I started and I was like, wow, I had no idea, what was involved so in moving me from, this point. And at that time in the Caribbean, the movement within the Caribbean was very high. So there was one of the busiest routes was between Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago. Almost every airline, had a flight between Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago. So, BWI at the time, Air Canada, British Airways, KLM, America. And that was one of the changes that I've seen in my career. Because as the aircraft were able to go, more efficiently from point to point, these stops were not necessary. So previously you might have had, Miami, Barbados, Trinidad. And now you have, Miami, Trinidad, Miami, Barbados. So that whole, busy route has changed completely. There's in fact fewer movements within the Caribbean, which makes it actually more expensive sometimes to fly within the Caribbean than to go to Miami, given the airline economics.
I know about that.
Yeah. That's one of the big, changes that I saw. Then, of course, as I said, I joined in, 90, did my training. I started working in 1991. And the other thing that was interesting is that in 1991, we were having the international conference, IFATCA conference in Port-au-Spain. And I remember seeing the former chairman of IFATCA, in the news, and that was my involvement then. He went on to become president of IFATCA. And then I went on to become president of IFATCA. So again, again, looking at that, I remember all of this and, had no clue, what the future held. But
and
once...
just as a terminology, no idea. IFATCA is actually International Federation of Air Traffic Control Associations, of which Alexis, I will reiterate, was president and CEO. So that's just put the context there.
Yes. Yeah. And once I got in and, we spoke, at the time would talk about, the issues that we had to deal with to make, the systems better. And then I learned about the Federation, went to my first conference in 1993 in New Zealand. And once I understood what the Federation was doing, which was trying to highlight the issues so controllers from around the world would come together, present the issues and develop policies that we would then try to have our associations implement or the International Civil Aviation Organization implement. So just to get a little bit technical here, ICAO has a convention to which all these countries have signed. And then they have annexes to these conventions, which establish the standards. And the way IFATCA does it, which I really like, is that they would look at all of these standards. And for those that they find deficient, they would then highlight or create a policy for that. And then lobby the organization through committees to update those policies or introduce those policies. It's a bit easier from the pilot side because most of the policies that they're addressing are technical policies, operational policies. It was more difficult on the traffic control side because most of the policies were what would deem social policies in conditions, so they tend to be a little wary, that's more for union issue. And then we established ourselves and to establish, to the community, we were addressing professional issues. We were a professional organization. And through diligent work, that was accepted. In 2001, ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, accepted IFATCA as, a standing member of the community who could be invited to all of these, meetings. And then in 2000, I think it was around 2008 when I was on the executive board at the time. So I was first on the executive board as a deputy president, then president and CEO. We were accepted as part of the committees, as a standing member of the committees that actually establish the standards and the recommended practices. And full circle, in 2018, I was actually chairman of one of these conferences, chairman of the Air Navigation Conference that looked at, adopting policies and is a precursor to the annual meeting of ICAO, that triennial meeting that takes place every 3 years. So, a lot of work has been going on by a lot of people from, all over the world in different countries from 1961, built to the point where, air traffic control through IFATCA has a standing voice in the development of aviation.
And the safety of passengers globally.
Yes.
And it's an extraordinary balance, Alexis, isn't it, to balance safety and efficiency. Yes. And succeed in doing it. It's a real leadership. It's a real leadership skill and demonstration of leadership in practice. When you look at the cultural differences and the geographical differences between all of the contributors, and a little bit of acronym coverage here: ICAO, International Civil Aviation Authority; IFALPA is International Federation of Airline Pilots Associations, and IFATCA is the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers Associations, just in case those slipped by and you didn't know what they were. All of those combine to keep you and me and Alexis safe every time we get in an airplane. Alexis, listen, it's been fascinating. Will you come back and can we discuss this further? And also the leadership elements, and how, I guess we must also touch upon the cultural issues and how you get over those cultural issues. And I guess the immense level of a degree of negotiation and accommodation that must go on at these meetings with IFATCA and ICAO. I'm sure that our listeners and viewers would be more than interested to have further insight into that if you'd like to come back and we can move that up forward and speak further.
Sure, Barry. I think the big takeaway from me from my career is that intense level of collaboration that was needed, by entities and, as you say, persons from different cultures, different backgrounds, different perspectives, and the need to work together in what really is a system of systems that's really complex. So we can get into our silos, but then you have to understand how the entire system works.
And get out of the silos.
Yes.
Get out of the silo and get talking and get communicating.
Absolutely.
And get chewing on the problem. Yeah, Alexis, yes. Fantastic. Excited to have you on. We look forward to the next one. Just so you know, for Alexis and I met at the fantastic Oxford Review. And if you don't know about the Oxford Review, Google it. and join us. And we look forward to seeing you there as well. Alexis, thank you. We'll see you again very, very soon.
Okay, thank you, Barry, and success.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.